Well, welcome to another episode of the Nebraska Way, where it's all about Nebraska and how we're growing and more. And today's guest, Congressman Don Bacon, is from our 2nd Congressional District. So we're going to have a great conversation, not only about Congressman Bacon's background, but also some of the current events that are going on today and how Congressman Bacon sees that, because it has an impact on all of us around the world. So Congressman Bacon, welcome. Glad to have you on board here.
Thank you, Governor Ricketts. It's a pleasure to be with you.
All right, great. So let me just get into a little bit of your background here so we can familiarize our viewers and listeners here with who you are. You grew up on a farm in Illinois, right? And you actually married your high school sweetheart, Angie, right? You guys were high school sweethearts.
Years old.
Met her when you were 18 years old. That's awesome. And you attended the University of Illinois, Northern Illinois, graduated with a bachelor's degree in political science in 1984. And then that same year, when you married Angie, you've also joined the Air Force. You've served for nearly 30 years. You retired at the rank of Brigadier General. Your career highlights include a wing commander position at Offutt Air Force Base here in Bellevue, Nebraska. And in total, you had 16 assignments, including 4 deployments in the Middle East, including Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2007 and 2008, and obviously that was in Iraq. And then you also have military decorations from the Air Force, including the Air Force Distinguished Service Medal, 2 Bronze Star, 2 Legion of Merits, 5 Meritorious Service Medals, and the Aerial Achievement Medal. And then upon retirement from the Air Force in 2014, you served as a military advisor focusing on Offutt Air Force Base and the Nebraska National Guard. You are also an assistant professor at Bellevue University. I didn't know that. That's cool. And then you presently, of course, you got elected to Congress in 2016. And then you presently serve on 2 committees, the House Armed Services Committee and the House Agricultural Committee, both of them obviously very appropriate for Nebraska. But before we get into all of that, why don't we just start with, let's take us back to the beginning, Don. Tell us about growing up in Illinois and, meeting Angie, deciding to study political science, and then you joined the Air Force. So take us back to the beginning.
So I was raised on a farm, corn and soybeans and beef cattle, and it was a really nice farm. My grandparents had a house on one end of the farm, and my uncle lived next door to my grandparents. And on the other end of the farm, about a half mile away or so, maybe 2/3 of a mile, we had our house, and my aunt had a house next door. So we had 4 houses on this farm. It was corn and soybeans and beef cattle, and that's what I did until I was 21 years old and joined the Air Force. I mean, I went to school, obviously school, whether it's high school or whatever, or college in the winter, but during the summer I worked on the farm. And my dad made me work a second job. He said, one job's not enough. You got to work full-time on the farm, and then you got to work at night at a restaurant. That was my dad's expectations. And if I did anything less than that, I was a slacker.
Well, that's where you learned that work ethic.
Yeah, that's right. Well, my dad taught me work ethic, and so did my grandfather and my uncle as well. But I love working on the farm. I did I had aspirations to always I've always loved military stuff, always liked political stuff. My grandmother gave me a book on World War II when I was 10 years old, and I read it like a dozen times. I was so fascinated by it. And so then I started a love of military history. I also loved Abraham Lincoln, George Washington, Ronald Reagan. I was reading about all these political people. I love reading about how our Constitution was put together. And so I sort of took me in a love of political things as well. And those are my interests in high school and college. And when I went to college, I sort of thought maybe I should be a businessman or someone to make money, maybe go to Ameritrade or something like that. But I didn't really like studying business or accounting. I took computer science. I took all these things I thought I could make money at. And in the end, I just liked political science and history. And I thought, well, I guess I better give in to what I like. So I became a poli-sci major, a history minor, and graduated at 20 years old out of college. And I was dating Angie at that time. But I worked for Congressman Ed Madigan for a while when I graduated at 20. And I decided that if I wanted to get involved in elected office, you need to have done something with your life. So I thought, and I love the military. So I decided to join the military. I thought I'd do it for 4, maybe 8 years. But I loved it. And I ended up doing 30 years and 16 assignments. And then I got out and then got involved with elected office. I was just delayed. God's timing, versus my timing.
Yeah. Yeah. Good. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your service to our country. Really appreciate that. That's again great that you had such a wonderful career there. But I don't want to skip the part that you and Angie have been married for over 30
38
years. 38 years, and you've got
Right.
3 sons, a daughter, and how many grandkids?
We got 6 grandkids, and I hope more's on the way at some point. Our kids are still in it. We hope to fill up a house with grandkids. But I have to admit, I love these grandkids. I just can watch them for hours. They fascinate me. And when you're a parent, and you can maybe relate to this, you're working hard. You're trying to get your career in place. And I was working 12 hours a day. I am doing that now too. But something about when you're now at that age where you just see the specialness of when this little 1-year-old boy looks at you and smiles. It's being honest.
Yeah.
There's no deceit there.
Not always something you find in politics either, by the way.
Right.
So.
Back to your comments too about the service. I loved my time in the military. I probably didn't enjoy the Pentagon. Those are 2 of my assignments. But the other 14 assignments, I don't even call it work. I'd show up, I'd work 12, 14 hours a day. I'd wake up excited. I'd go to bed at night excited about what we were doing. And it was, the taxpayers could have probably paid me in half and I would have done it because I loved what I was doing.
Yeah. And that's great. It's a great mission, right? You're protecting our nation.
And it's the camaraderie. It's who you're serving with, putting teams together. It's like when you're on a team, you win the Super Bowl or you win the World Series, you feel great. When you're on a military team and you're getting your job done, you're winning in combat or you're passing inspection or you're rated the best in the Air Force, those kind of things, you feel like you won the Super Bowl and you're on this team. That's how I felt almost every day in the military. I was on a Super Bowl team and we were doing well.
Yeah, cool. Very cool. Well, tell me, because you got a number of different awards and medals and so forth. Tell me about the aerial achievement one. What did you do to get aerial achievement?
Well, I did that when I was a lieutenant colonel primarily. As a squadron commander, I commanded an EC-130 squadron during the invasion of Iraq. And so it's about flying in combat and hitting certain criteria of number of sorties that you flew. But more broadly, to me, was our unit did really well. We were rated the best Air Force unit in Air Combat Command during the invasion of Iraq. So Air Combat Command contains all the combat air forces at the time, anyway, in the continental United States. And so all these units deployed over, and we were the first unit to deploy. And I commanded that unit for 6 months during the invasion of Iraq. And when Air Combat Command rated our unit number 1 out of all the units that deployed into the Middle East, like I say, it's like winning the Super Bowl. You feel good.
Yeah.
Our team did well, and we had 9 crews. Every crew had 300 hours average every 30 days flying.
Wow.
Think about it, it's a lot of flying. And
what was the mission?
We were jamming Iraqi air defenses, Iraqi armor units, so any military thing that would use radars or communications. Our job was to sever that link or degrade that radar, so we were flying right behind the Army and the Marines, trying to jam the Iraqi military primarily. We were also jamming Iraqi air forces, their surface-to-air missiles, anything that could shoot at us. We were trying to degrade.
Very cool. Well, that's a good mission to be performing the best on.
Right.
So the other side can't shoot at you. That's a good deal. Now, what was your most memorable achievement, throughout your Air Force career?
I would say leading a unit in combat. And I got to back up. I was part of this unit when I was a captain, and I love the unit, EC-130 unit. I was 3 times at Offutt, 3 times at Tucson, Arizona, out of my 16 assignments. So I had a lot of 55th Wing time here at Offutt. But I was also flying these EC-130s every other or third assignment. You went from captain, then I flew again a lieutenant colonel, then I flew as a colonel. And over time, they merged that EC-130 unit in with the 55th Wing at Offutt. So I'd fly RCs with Offutt, ECs at Tucson, but they were all part of the same wing with the commander here at Offutt Air Force Base. So I really became a 55th Wing guy out of Offutt. Totally, I was, most of my career was somehow wedded to the Offutt unit here. But our unit had struggled, and it was never the people's command leaders. And I saw leaders that maybe mailed it in, doing a B-level effort, didn't maybe have the selfless attitudes they should have. And I saw that as a captain and moving up the ranks. And the 3 or 4 commanders before me either got fired or there were some struggles. I'll just put it that way. And I had an opportunity to take this unit into combat, and I wanted so bad for this unit to excel, not for me, but for the unit. I wanted the unit to come out with a pride that we were the best. And when we come back and we came back with knowing that we did very well there. And when the Air Combat Command rated you number 1 out of there, and that's probably the most memorable thing is leading a unit in combat, doing well, getting everybody home. I worried in the middle of that. If I lost 1 crew, that's 13 people, right? And so that weighs on you when you're at night and you're a commander and you got units flying over Baghdad. And so that's probably the most memorable. I've had some other things that were refining moments. Like I had to go up against a couple of my bosses that I thought were doing things that hurt the unit or were not holding discipline in line, character or moral issues, and went over their head. And when you do that, that you're taking some risks, as you can probably well know. But in the end, God blessed, and I was found to be on the right side of these issues. There's a saying, if you fall on your sword, don't miss.
Yeah.
If you're doing it every day, you probably got something wrong. But once or twice in my career, I did. But it was a defining moment that you stand on principle, you do the right thing. And in the end, God's going to take care of you on that. And I found that to be the case my time in the Air Force. So I have some situations like that, too, that define me as a leader.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned, you're always worried about somebody not coming home. I think you've actually had to have some of those conversations with families, right, about their loved one who didn't make it home. Because you and I have talked about this in the past. Those are tough conversations. And how did you approach those?
Yeah, when I was a lieutenant and a captain, it was one of my fears that was I up to the task to knocking on a door and talking to a family. It really weighed on me because I thought, that sounds like the most hard thing to do. But then I made lieutenant colonel, and general. And when you're made general, you get that task. You're going to be the guy that goes to the family. And sometimes they already know, but they don't know what happened. Sometimes they already know what happened. In my case, I had to go to 10 different families' homes and talk about why in this case, was always a son. And sometimes I had to talk to a wife, but more often that was parents, because a lot of these folks weren't married. Some were married, so I had to talk to parents and a spouse at different times. But God sort of taught me that, Don, this is why you're here. Your job is to be the very best at this, to be the most gracious, merciful person to talk to a mom or dad or a spouse in these situations. And so, you go in there and it was my job to really relay to the family what happened and to do it with compassion. And I think 9 out of 10 times I cried with the family because they cried and I cried with them. I had another situation with a mom in Hawaii, and she stared at the wall the entire time. Didn't say a word, expressionless, would maybe answer a question if I asked her. And I knew she was grieving in a different way. But when we were all done, I was with her for about an hour and a half. She asked me if she could cook dinner for me, And so, but it was, all 10 of those times I'll never forget either anyone. I remember one of the first ones I went to, a mom and dad in Fairfax, Virginia. And I walked in and sat down, and they had me sit down, and then the mom and dad started crying together, and they held each other for about 10 minutes. I had to cry with them.
Yeah. Well, that's part of what the leadership role is in the military. I mean, it is a dangerous profession because you're taking up the defense of our nation. And
another time that's almost was emotional or pointed to my heart. I had to do 12 funerals at Arlington too, and I showed up as a general at Arlington or at the Pentagon one day, and as I showed up for my first day, I overheard a conversation. They need to have a general at Arlington Cemetery. The family wants a general to present the flag. So I said, well, I'll do it. I'm new. So I went down to the cemetery and was the flag bearer, and somehow then I started getting asked to do it there and to be with the family at the chapel. And you have about a 45-minute service. Then you walk with them for a half mile to a mile, depending where the cemetery location is going to be at the burial location. And to be at that funeral with the gun salute and the taps. It's also very something I'll never forget those either. And I'll never forget every family you've ever handed a flag to. You got to hand it with hand on top. They're always hugging that flag,
Yeah.
And something I'll never forget that either.
Yeah. Now, as you mentioned, you had a couple of stints at Offutt Air Force Base, and you actually retired away from Offutt, but you and Angie moved back to Nebraska. Talk a little bit about, well, a couple of things I want you to talk about. One, why'd you move back? And then talk a little bit, because you've been a big advocate for Offutt Air Force Base, some of the improvements there with regard to the runway. Maybe you could talk about why did you move back, and why is Offutt and STRATCOM so important to Nebraska?
Well, we love Eastern Nebraska, Omaha area. I mean, we had 3 assignments at Offutt itself. My whole family loved Omaha, these assignments, to include my kids and my wife. And so literally, when I retired, my 2 oldest sons already lived here. And my wife said, "Hey, I plan on retiring in Omaha. I hope you do too."
So you better come along.
I was sort of the head I took. But it started though in 1986 when I showed up as a second lieutenant. Granted, I was raised in rural Illinois. It was the Rust Belt era, Franklin for the Midwest. Great agriculture area where I was at in Illinois, but there was very little options outside of farming. There was not a lot of industry, a lot of just you're either, I always joke around, you're either a farmer, you could be a preacher, you could be a divorce lawyer. But this is sort of my jokes about living in that area. But when we showed up in Omaha or Bellevue in '86, we were astounded at. I didn't have all this opportunities all the time. I was just like, now I'm getting to see the United States for the first time outside of where I was raised, and the opportunities here. We were just couldn't believe not only just agriculture, but you have this financial sector, you have transportation sector, all this agribusiness, just a huge, diverse economy in Omaha. And also you have the Midwest values here. People are nice. They treat you respectfully. Yeah. And so we fell in love with Omaha in '86 and liked it every time we came back. And then I came back as a major, and my sons played travel soccer with local soccer teams. And all of my kids went to Bellevue West at one point or another. We loved the area. And so it was not hard we knew where we wanted to come back. This became home over time. Now, about Omaha itself, Omaha was the capital of the center part of my career. I loved the 55th Wing. I loved Offutt. And so I hope that when I'm 80, 85 years old, if God's kind enough to let me live that long, I'm part of the 55th Wing Alumni Association. I'm part of the base heritage and doing stuff with the veterans. It's just what I sort of envision. It's, what I like doing as time goes on. I want to just be part of that family. But Offutt's so critical to our local area. About $3 billion a year of economic impact comes into the local area. And we have 10,000 people working on base.
Yeah.
And of course, so that income level is being spent here. You have all these contracts that are here. So you have contract workers working on base as well. That's not part of the 10,000. And so it's just an important part of the economic vitality of Nebraska. But we can't forget it's critical to our military. STRATCOM headquarters runs all of our nuclear weapons. It's the nuclear. If we ever have nuclear combat, that's where the commander's at. Yeah. And then it's also one of the primary hubs for intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, which is what I did. And so it's very important just for the national security of our country.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's, again, why you've been a big advocate for things such as repairing the runway and really, securing that mission that we've done, since it was, Strategic Air Command was located here in 1948, right? 1948?
Yep, it came in here late 40s with Curtis LeMay.
I think it was actually
he was the second guy. He was General Kennedy started, but then General LeMay came in, and I think he served for like almost 11 years here. It was just probably a long time. But then the 55th Wing here came here in the mid-1960s with the RCs. And so it's been a good marriage.
Yeah, very good. Well, now, one of the other things, and I know you're a big advocate, is the Nebraska National Guard. Talk to me about what you have seen with the Nebraska National Guard and how you've worked with them and how you've been an advocate and that sort of thing.
Well, I see it in 2 different areas. When I was a junior officer, I didn't work a lot with the Guard or Reserves. It was all active duty. But, man, after my 4 stints in the Middle East, you realize it's a total force effort. The active duty could not have done 20 years in the Middle East without the Guard and reserves. And so when I did my 1 year in with General Petraeus, I'd say half the military I served with were Guard and reserves. So you will realize just how important the Guard and reserves are in a situation like that. And I know Nebraska has folks right now in the CENTCOM AOR. They have people on the border right now. They have people down in the Horn of Africa. So they're augmenting the active duty, and they're great because this is what they do day in and day out. These folks served in the Air Force, Air National Guard. They've been part of that tanker unit for decades, right? Or the older guys have been anyway, the older folks. But like an active duty, I do something for 3 years, I move on, I do something new, and 3 years later I do something new. The Guard guys really specialize in their area, and they're great at what they do. Typically, when we do air competitions, the Guard and reserves win because they've flown that aircraft for their entire career. I remember a chief master sergeant was mad at me when I was a lieutenant colonel, and I was deployed, and he was in an Air National Guard unit in Pennsylvania. I go, Chief, what the heck's bothering you? He goes, yeah, 15 years ago, your unit did this to me. I go, Chief, I've only been part of this unit for 3 years. He knew for 15 years. He was holding this grudge against our unit. And I said, nobody in that unit is still here. Yeah. And but the Guard, they have deep roots, and they're really good at what they do. Now, I will tell you, when I was at the 55th Wing as the wing commander, as a brigadier general, the Guard, Air National Guard, were integrated into the active duty all over our wing, especially the flying side in particular, but also the intelligence side. And you couldn't tell who was Guard or who was active duty. And after about a month in there, it dawned on me. I was looking around, like every fourth or fifth person, I don't know how much it was in the Guard. And they were seamlessly one team. And at the time, the Air Force was having real troubles with other units that had the setup. There was like a war, who was in charge? We had none of that. Our Nebraska Guard and our active duty guys at the 55th were the best team in the Air Force between Guard and active duty. We were the benchmark for how it was supposed to be done. And so that's been my experience. I've had a great relationship with all the commanders out of the Nebraska Guard. Great team players. So I have all admiration for the Guard guys. And by the way, I'm excited. Our new district has Camp Ashland in it.
Yeah.
And they're going to get a lot of love from Bacon.
Good deal. Well, and of course, as governor, I'm the commander in chief of the Nebraska National Guard. And when anybody wants to start talking about how, this young generation of Americans, they don't work hard, they expect to have everything, given to them, just really trying to badmouth young people, I always say, hey, you look at our Nebraska National Guard. These young women and men volunteer for the Nebraska National Guard, and it's a very different role today than it was, say, 25 years ago. 25 years ago, when people signed up, they didn't expect to get deployed. Today's young women and men join up, and they not only expect to get deployed, they want to be deployed. They want to take the fight to the enemy. And they are part of helping make sure that we stay on mission. And you talked about it, because the 55th Wing has been continuously deployed, I think since 9/11, right?
We've been the longest deployed, continuously deployed weapon system or unit in the Air Force. Yeah. And we couldn't do it with it. And the Guard brings a lot of the best instructors to help train the new active duty guys coming in. It really is a good synergy that we have. And to your broader point, the folks who are volunteering today, they truly are in the top 1% of our nation. They're 1% who serve. These folks volunteer knowing they're going into combat. And so they're the 1% of our nation who raise their right hand, so they're going to defend our country. Yeah.
And what is really cool about the National Guard today is that they are getting the training, and you described some of that seamless integration with the active duty folks. The training they get today allows them to do these missions that they couldn't do 25 years ago because they weren't getting the training then. And now with the demands of the war on terror that's been going on, that we've had people deployed. But anyway, they've been getting the training, and they have absolutely been performing, as you mentioned, here in Nebraska. It's absolutely seamless with the missions that the active duty folks are doing. So I just couldn't be more proud.
Well, I'm with you. And the active duty Guard reserves are so well integrated today. And I didn't see that growing up. I didn't even never really knew a Guard or reserve guy for my first 15 years in the military, right? But then you see it. We could not have done it without this full team, the total force team, in the last 20 years in the Middle East. So yeah, that's cool. Team effort.
Very cool. All right. Well, let's switch gears here a little bit. I wanted to talk just a little bit about some of the stuff that's going on, just in general. If you think about when you began your career back in the 1980s, the Soviet Union, USSR, was the primary opponent that the military forces trained for. Today, obviously, the Soviet Union has collapsed, but Russia is still very aggressive. Why don't you talk a little bit about how you see, what Putin is doing in the Ukraine, or I guess I shouldn't say in the Ukraine. The country is called Ukraine. Talk a little about what you see with regard to what Putin is doing with Russia, Ukraine. He's obviously got troops lined up on the border. Just talk to me about what you think about what's going on there right now, and what's Putin's goals, and what do we do as the United States to help protect peace and security in Europe?
Yeah, it's interesting. We've gone back to the future. When I came in, it was the Soviet Union, like you said, and then became more Middle East focused, with Iraq and Iran, Afghanistan, that was terrorism. And now we're back to Russia, and China is ascendant. They're going to be the issue that we're going to have to deal with for the decades to come.
Yeah, we're going to get there.
So,
we got a question on the People's Republic of China too. So don't worry, Don, we're going to get there.
Over 30 years or 35 years, how the world environment has changed, and now where we're back to. But how I see Putin wants to bring Russia back to the glory days of even before the Soviet Union, like Peter the Great. He wants to restore the empire.
He wants to,
and he thinks Empire. Ukraine has always been a part of Russia. And the problem is this: the Ukrainians don't want to be a part of Russia. We forget Stalin killed 3.9 million Ukrainians in the 1930s.
Wow.
They haven't forgot that. So the Ukrainians do not want to be a part of Russia. They have their own nationality. They want to be their own country. They're 40 million people, a separate ethnicity in their own right. But the Russians see them as part of their empire. They see them as part of this giant, broader Orthodox empire, Christian Orthodox heritage that they have. And that's where Putin says he doesn't see Ukraine as a separate nation or people, that he wants to put them under Soviet Russian control, or at least their sphere of influence. And I think that's what's going on here. And he senses weakness with America today. Well, with Biden's, I would say, just totally botched withdrawal out of Afghanistan, I think President Putin sees a chance, or sees weakness there, sees maybe he can push this president around and provide ultimatums and demands that we're going to accede to, perhaps. And the intelligence community is pretty confident he is going to invade. I'm not in that community, so I don't know if they're right or wrong, but they're pretty confident.
So does he have, when we say invade, what would be his purpose? Does he think he's going to be able to militarily conquer Ukraine and hold it? Is he trying to do maybe what he did with the Crimea? I mean, again, you talked about weakness, and you go back to President Obama, who said, when the Russians took over Crimea, he said, well, this will not stand. Well, here we are, and it's still standing. Do you think he's trying to do the same thing, where it's occupy and hold it? Do you think he's going to invade it like maybe he did when China, or rather like what China did to Vietnam back in the 80s, where they just did an invasion and then backed out to kind of destabilize it? What's your thoughts? What do you think he's?
Well, there's debate there, and it's hard to know what's in President Putin's brain. Fact is, I'm not even sure if he knows yet. He's probably trying to read what he could get away with. But I'll tell you, the intelligence community, and I can say this because they've declassified much of this, they think it's going to be a more extensive invasion, where they're going to be in Kyiv in 4 days time, and take the capital of Ukraine. So that's sort of the going thought, but I really don't know. It's hard to know what's in Putin's brain. He's not broadcasting that. He's putting enough forces there where he could conquer the entire country. So he's putting the amount of force he needed. When you look at 130,000 forces on the border, he's put forces in Belarus. Shame on Belarus for letting these forces in their country and they're threatening their neighbors, because that's what's going on right now. They're putting enough air forces nearby to put in 300 or 400 type of aircraft that can hit all over Ukraine with daily missions. So the amount of force is clearly there. I think his intent is to have Ukraine fully under its control or sphere of influence. But it's hard to say. There's debate. Is it going to be small or big? But the capability is sure looking like an extensive invasion.
Yeah, and I think it is also important. You mentioned Ukrainians obviously see themselves as a separate country, but there are
Right.
Ukrainians of Russian descent who are primarily in the eastern part of the country, which is kind of where this civil war is going on right now,
Right.
that are obviously pro-Russian. So that creates another dynamic here. It almost,
Right.
again, reminds you of what Hitler did in World War II with the Germans in the Sudetenland and then Poland,
Hmm.
where he said, you know, I got to protect these ethnic Germans, and he used that as the pretext for an invasion. It seems somewhat like what Putin is setting himself up for on this right now.
Ironically, he's mad about these countries want to be part of NATO, but it's his own actions that are doing it. He invaded Crimea. He's attacked the Donbass region. And to your point, Crimea is heavily Russian, so is Donbass, but he's taken them. So that leaves the rest of Ukraine very pro-Ukrainian and pro-West. If he would have left Crimea and Donbass, then there'd be this divide in Ukraine. But he's almost had a counterintuitive, or say counterproductive strategy. He's pushed Ukraine into our family, our fold.
Right,
And,
by taking
so,
over the Russian parts of it, so that
Yeah, right.
that's not part of their political process. I mean, right? That's because there's been pro-Russian Ukrainian prime ministers, right?
Yes.
So you can get elected as a pro-Russian politician, except
If you
not
take
if
all the
you're
Ukrainian,
yeah,
take
not
all
if
the
you're
Russians,
yeah, if you take them all
put
out,
them in
right?
Russia, yeah, then you don't have any more Russian voters there. So
Right.
I think it's policy. I see the same with China. China did the same with Hong Kong. Taiwan is more anti-China today than ever because they saw what happened in Hong Kong. So these dictators, I call them dictators, their strategy is counterproductive. They don't play. I know they say they play chess, but I think in the end, they've pushed their border countries or their neighbors into our camp, and so NATO, all these countries want a NATO because they want to be under our safety umbrella, and that's exactly what Russia doesn't want. But it's appalling to me that Putin's doing this in Ukraine because you're looking at the largest land war since World War II, potentially, and there are always unanticipated consequences to war.
Yeah.
We don't know how this is going to end up. Is this going to drag in rest of Europe or not? Putin's taken a tremendous risk here, and we're in one of the most precarious situations going back to World War II.
Well, again, you look at obviously the assassination of Archbishop Ferdinand that started World War I, right? Just a couple. It was, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire and Serbia started what could have been a minor conflict and then blew up into World War I. And then, of course, Hitler had designs where he was looking for, Germany to expand, Lebensraum or whatever it was called. And so that's where he started going after these things, in Czechoslovakia and Poland and reoccupying the Rhineland, remilitarizing that. So it was just, again, step by step that ultimately ended up into World War II that cost tens of millions of lives. And to your point, we don't know where this could end up. It could end up into another major European war. And I wonder if the European countries, especially the NATO countries, who have not been living up to their obligations to provide for their military. I think that's one of the things that President Trump really pushed with our NATO allies is, hey, you got to start spending the 2% of GDP you're supposed to be spending on this because you're not doing it. Ironically, countries like Greece were when countries like Germany were not. And I think that Angela Merkel said she had a 10-year plan to get up to their level. Is this impacting those NATO allies? Or they're saying, oh, maybe we better really sharpen up our militaries here because this could end up really poorly?
Well, it sure shaped up some of them. I've not seen it out of Germany yet. I'll tell you, the Baltic states, if we think this is going to stop with Ukraine, the Russians feel the same way about the Baltic states. And these folks are the most pro-American folks in Europe. I'm telling you, these Baltic states a lot of them went to University of Chicago, they went to MIT. They have embraced our way of life, our free market system, as much as anybody has. But they're very vulnerable, 5 million people in most of the Baltic states, roughly. So they're doing their 2%. Poland's doing their 2%. Romania, because they're on the front lines,
right.
And they know that this is a serious threat to them eventually, if not now. Which Germany felt the same way. And I would say, even though Germany's only putting about 1% in, they've given us access to Ramstein, Spangdahlem. We cannot do what we're doing without these two major airfields.
Right.
So there are some trade-offs that they do provide us that are different than the 1%. I really appreciate the leadership that Great Britain's shown here. I think they've outshined us in how they're helping out Ukraine. Frankly, what I saw with President Biden, I've met with their team since December. they keep saying we're discussing what to do. Even in January, second week of January, we're discussing what to give Ukraine. I go, man, this has been going on for 2 months. It should have taken 2 days of discussions, 2 months of actions. They were doing two months of discussions, and they're very worried about provoking Putin. Yet they say Putin's already decided to invade. Who's being provocative here? He's being provocative. He's putting forces on the border. So I think we should be putting anti-shipping systems on the Black Sea with Ukraine, because they're threatening them with their Navy, with some landings there. We should be doing longer-range air defense capabilities and training the Ukrainians how to use it. I don't think it should be U.S. forces. But every time I bring it up, they say, it's provocative. Now they say, well, now it's maybe too late. I've seen a very weak
self-fulfilling
response.
prophecy. It's self-fulfilling prophecy there, right?
Yes. They spent 90% of their time with us in Congress talking about how they're going to respond to an invasion. What we need is 90% of the time discussing how are we going to deter an invasion. So we should be focused on how to deter. They're worried about how to respond. And it's like they've almost acceded or just given up. They're going to invade. How are we going to respond? It's the JV team up there right now. And you got people like Blinken, people like Sullivan, who I don't think they have what it takes to stand up to Putin. Putin can push them around all day.
Yeah. Well, let's switch gears a little bit. Let's talk about China, because that's also another, as you point out, China, Xi Jinping has, set out a goal for China to be the world power by 2049. Again, I think we should take him at his word for it. This is his goal. Yep. And obviously we've seen what he's doing with the persecution of the Uyghurs, the concentration camps, in Western China, how he's crushed, Hong Kong rights, actually violating the agreement that he had with the UK to protect those rights for 50 years. And now, of course, the building the islands in the South China Sea, has been doing that for a while, and of course, threatening Taiwan. Talk a little bit about how you see China and how that's developing, and what kind of is the role of Congress in working to deter their aggressive military actions.
Well, China's clearly the long-term threat for us, especially in that they want to be the world superpower. They do not share our values. And so my concern is that right now they're at about 90 to 95% of our GDP. It depends how you count it. Some people will say they've already hit it. Other base have a little lower. But the fact is they're nearing our GDP or our economic capacity. And they're growing often at 6%. And we are normally about 2 to 3 on a good years. Right now, coming out of COVID, we're a little higher, granted. But if we don't change the way we're operating, China's going to surpass us economically. And if they just put the same level of GDP spending towards their military, and you can just see what they're doing with this. They're ahead of us right now in hypersonics. They're spending a lot in artificial intelligence, quantum computing. They're producing stealth fighters and submarines, and they're building a nuclear inventory that's matching ours. This is the future, and we have to take this serious. Otherwise, they will become the superpower. And do we want the Chinese currency to be the world's currency? Well, it will have a devastating impact on us economically. And if we're not the superpower, we have the ability to talk about freedom, human dignity, free markets, equality under the law, rule of law. These are our values. These are not China's values, or the communist government's values anyway. They're about might makes right. And thgoing to put their might, and they're going to dictate to whoever they want, because it's more about their self-interest and their economy. And that's going to be a more bleak world that our kids and grandkids are going to live through. And so my concern as a country, we have to start focusing on how we can move forward on whether it's immigration, national security, border. And we got to find areas to start working together. Otherwise, China's going to surpass us. And it's not a better world with them as being a superpower.
With the Chinese Communist Party, in charge. That's not a better world for anybody.
No, right.
So what are the things what are the things we should be doing, or what are the things can the United States do to be proactive on this?
Well, one thing, in the end, it's our economic strength underwrites the rest of our strength. You have to have a strong economy before you can have a strong military and a strong national security strategy. So I think it's very important that we defend our a competitive tax code, because in the end, this tax code that we did in 2017 gave us the strongest economy we had in 40 years. The current president, the Democrat leadership want to get rid of that. They want our corporate taxes, our business taxes, to be the highest in the world, right? Well, that doesn't help us compete.
Right.
We have to have an economy that is the most competitive in the world, and we have to defend a tax code and a regulatory code that does that. So to me, that starts right there. When it comes to facing China itself, though, we can't do it by ourselves. We have roughly equivalent economies. China does not have a lot of allies. Who wants to be, if you're a third world country in Asia and they're offering to build your port, but really what they're doing is they're going to take over your port and they're going to run it, and they're going to run your country. Most of these countries I talk to, they want to be friends with us because we treat them like equals. We offer a better way of life. Freedom and equality and rule of law. It is the right way to be. But my broader point is we're going to build an alliance or a coalition of freedom-loving countries that work together to counter China. So I think part of that's trade. We're going to have to get back to where we're building a free trade or a trade agreement with like-minded countries in Asia and keep China out. What we've done now, China wants to become a member of TPP, even though we pulled out of TPP. That is a threat.
Yeah.
If they're going to be part of the TPP and we're not, so we got to be able to compete and build alliances with our like-minded friends, economic, trade, military, and that's how we're going to be able to counter China in the long run.
All right. Well, let's talk about something else that you mentioned earlier in the program here. You talked about the disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. From your perspective, you're on the Armed Services Committee. What happened? Why was that such a disaster?
I think President Biden had it in his mind to do this since 2015, when we had 100,000 troops there. We were taking a lot of combat losses. And I think he had said at that time he wanted us out of Afghanistan. I think it was in his mind at that point on. So when he became president, he decided he was going to pull us out. Now, this is what we had in Afghanistan at the time that the President Biden said he wanted us to withdraw, particularly directed it in July. We had 3,500 troops. They were not in combat. They were in garrison. We had taken a loss in a year and a half. And what we did have was combat air power so that the Afghan forces that were fighting could call in our air power, and within 15 minutes, we could have bombs on target. And that made the Taliban so they couldn't congregate and concentrate to take on Afghanistan. We could have fought in this way indefinitely. 3,500 troops on the ground, nobody in combat, all in garrison. We had combat air power. And we were also maintaining, the Afghan Air Force was actually pretty good, but they required our mechanics to keep their Air Force flying. Their pilots were doing pretty good, though. So in July, we pulled out our Air Force. We pulled out our mechanics. We also took away the people that helped do their logistics to get bullets to the frontline forces. And then you wonder why we thought their forces could hold for 2 years. Basically, we took away what they were used to using for fighting. They did pretty well on the ground with our air power, but we pulled it away. And so President Biden, I don't know if it was wishful thinking. I think he thought we just pull out, we're going to get out of there. One thing I find about him and his team, words are more important than actions. They think if they put pretty words together, that somehow makes the day. So, yeah, Afghan's going to hold for 2 years. If they fold, we're going to get all the interpreters out. We'll get our forces out. And none of it worked out that way. None of it was truthful. And so we ended up leaving. They caved in 2 weeks. 90% of the interpreters are still there. That pisses me off, right? Yeah. We took out over 100,000 Afghans, of which almost none of them have served with our military.
Oh, you got to be kidding me. I thought the whole point was to get Afghans out who would serve with us.
No, it was Afghans who they flooded the airport, and we just threw everybody into an airplane and got them out. Most of them never served with us, had nothing to do with us. Yet the interpreters, the guys who are being murdered today in Afghanistan, 90% of them are still there because they couldn't even get there. They were pretty much barricaded from getting there, and they couldn't get through the crowds. And we still have about 200 to 300 citizens still in Afghanistan. So that is a failure in its own right. We didn't even tell our allies we were withdrawing when we announced it. Boris Johnson spent 36 hours trying to get a hold of Joe Biden to figure out what the hell's going on, right? Our best ally. We didn't even tell him. And our adversaries were emboldened by this. Not only just Russia and China, also Iran, the terrorists. The terrorists think they won this fight. This has been a disgrace. The worst colossal disaster in my lifetime. And so you know what? I was sitting there with General Milley in committee hearing, and the 4-star general from the Central Command, also Secretary Austin. They said this was a strategic defeat, a strategic failure was the words they used. Yet President Biden said this was a success, and he has no regrets. It makes me angry when I hear that.
Yeah.
And then to top it off, he told Stephanopoulos on ABC, Joe Biden did, that the military agreed with him on the withdrawal. And yet I heard straight, like I'm looking at you right now on the screen, General Milley said, we recommended against the withdrawal. We were overruled. We followed a lawful order.
Right.
President Biden lied.
President gets to make the call.
He did, but President Biden lied when he said the military
Yeah.
agreed with him on the withdrawal. They said they wanted to keep 2,500 to 3,500 troops there indefinitely, and the situation they're in was 7,000 NATO troops, and they were overruled. So this was a disaster. And you know what? And the president's paying for it. He was at 55% favorables roughly. The American people saw gross incompetence, saw a disaster, and that's why he's sitting at 39% today. Or it was the beginning of that huge quick decline in about 1 month. The Americans saw a disaster, they saw incompetence, and he's paying for it still.
Yeah. Yep. No, I think there's nobody who that I've talked to thinks that this was a success. Everybody there isn't anybody trying to defend this. Like, oh, that worked out really well.
Joe Biden calls it a success.
Yeah, except for the president, because everybody else acknowledges this was terrible on, all the things you pointed out and more. The amount of equipment we left behind, where that's going to place us strategically going forward in the future. It's just an unmitigated disaster, and totally self-inflicted. Right? We did this to ourselves. This was not forced by anybody else to do this.
Veterans all over our country are enraged. 20 years of investment. I know 5 people who died in Afghanistan. You're like, this is just a colossal disaster. And I said in committee, I'll say it here, made me mad as hell.
Yeah.
And
well, I think our veterans need to know that this is not reflective of their sacrifice in Afghanistan. That their efforts for 20 years have kept attacks away from our homeland, and what President Biden did in this just, again, terrible disaster is in no way reflective of the heroic service of our men and women in uniform who fought and bled and died in Afghanistan.
We take pride that we killed Osama bin Laden. We captured KSM. He's at Guantanamo, the mastermind of 9/11, and we preserved attacks or safeguarded against attacks from Afghanistan for over 2 decades. We can take pride in that.
Yep. All right, so we've been talking for a while. Is there any, I've been asking the questions, but Congressman, is there anything that you wanted to hit upon? Because we didn't even talk about agriculture, and we don't have time to get into a tremendous conversation about that. But is there anything that you wanted to hit upon before we wrap up things?
My broad interests have always been to ensure that we have a strong national security strategy, and that we have a peace through strength. I've always had an interest in ensuring that those components that make for a strong economy, a tax code, a regulatory policy, trade policy, that we're the most competitive in the world. And I've always going to want to be an advocate for our faith and family values, pro-life and pro-family. And that's what motivated me to run. I would say in the local area, we have some things that we can do to a little more targeted areas like the University of Nebraska Medical Center, the Next T project, things that you and I are working on together to help for the next chapter there, bringing in 1,000 jobs, great investment there. The things we're doing at the base, where we're rebuilding the base that was destroyed during the floods, some of the infrastructure work that we're doing that's going to grow Omaha. But those are some targeted things that I'm excited about that will have a direct impact on our local constituents. But big picture, it's about defending America, defending our way of life, defending our family, and that's what I love doing in Congress. And I hope to. If I'm not doing that as a congressman, those will always be my missions in life, no matter what job I have.
All right, very good. Well, hey, thank you so much for being on here today, and I want to thank all of our viewers and listeners. Again, thank you very much for listening to the podcast. You can certainly encourage you to go subscribe, give us a nice rating. That always helps get more subscribers. You can also, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Instagram, pete.ricketts@nebraska.gov if you want to email, my office. It's always a great way to get a hold of us. And Congressman, if people want to follow you and the work that you're doing on behalf of Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District, how would they follow the work that you've got going in Congress, whether it's the Armed Services Committee, the Agriculture Committee, or any of your other priorities? How would you want people to follow you?
On the official site, it's Rep. Don Bacon, whether it's Twitter or www.repdonbacon.com on internet. Also on Facebook, it's Rep. Don Bacon. And then on the political or personal side, it's Don J. Bacon, at Don J. Bacon on Twitter, and on the political side as well. And I'm back in town for about 2 weeks. We're going to be doing 4 to 8 events a day back in town. We love getting out and about, love hearing from our great constituents. And Governor, it's always a pleasure working with you and representing this great state and the great part of eastern Nebraska here.
Well, hey, thanks a lot, Congressman. I really appreciate it. It has been a great working relationship. We've got a great federal delegation and appreciate all the work that you've done to help us with the important things like Offutt Air Force Base that you mentioned is so important to our overall defense of this nation with STRATCOM there and the role that the 55th Wing plays, but also because, as you mentioned, it plays such a huge economic role, 10,000 people being employed there, not counting the contractors, the $3 billion of economic activity. That's a huge deal for the Omaha area and for our state in general. So really appreciate all your work to continue to support that mission to protect our country that also benefits Nebraska greatly. So thank you very much for all your work. Thank you for your service in the Air Force. Thank you for your service in Congress. You're in Washington, D.C. I'm in Lincoln. I like being in Lincoln. I'm glad you're in D.C.
I'm ready to be home today.
All right. Thanks a lot. Have a great day, Congressman.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Paid for by Pete Ricketts for Governor, 1610 N Street, Suite 100, Lincoln, Nebraska, 68508.